Hey folks, thanks for tuning in for this episode here of the Brothers Trek About. Space Seed is this week. How exciting is that? NOONIEN SINGH, boys and girls, we get to talk about it. But before we do, I do want to mention that there is some talk about sexual assault in this episode, and we do gloss over it pretty casually, mostly because what Khan is doing here is like the worst manipulation in the most overtly gross way. I think I speak for my brother here when I say that I've never thought that unwantedly touching a girl in any way is anything but inappropriate or illegal. I mean, pinching a waitress or walking through a crowd at a festival and grabbing a lady, I mean, like, what even is that? Like, what is that doing for the guy? All of this to say is that I think that our glossing over of it in this episode is because it's so clearly wrong that we don't even need to like mention it, right? Like, this doesn't happen in the regular, on the Enterprise, in the Federation. It shouldn't happen in the real world. So the fact that we don't talk about it is because I think that the audience is supposed to be skeeved and creeped out, and prove further proof that what Khan is doing here is working from a psychopathic instinct. It sucks that any of this needs to be even to be said. And obviously, we by no means approve or condone any of it. So, enjoy the episode. I hope you think it's great. It's a lot of fun. Ken thinks that this would have been 3 episodes, a 3-episode arc had it been created today in the world of serial television, as opposed to back in the 60s when everything was episodic. So, wait for that. Enjoy. Hey everybody, welcome back to another big episode of the Brothers Trek About, the original series. We are doing one of my favorite episodes today. Very excited about it. I can't even hold in my excitement. It's ridiculous. This is probably one of the most monumental episodes of the original series, an episode without which wouldn't have brought us one of my favorite Star Trek movies and also another show called Fantasy Island. So here today we are going to present to you Space Seed, dun dun dun. And of course, as always, I can't be the lone brother in a show called The Brothers Trek About, so let's say hello to my brother and yours from Houston. Say hello, Ken.
Peace and long life.
Hey, there he is. All right, excellent. Well, like I said, Space Seed's the name of the game today. Ken, how long has it been since you have watched this episode?
It's been months.
Months? I was expecting you to say years. It's been like 20 years for me since I've seen this episode. And you're like, nope, it's been a couple of months for me. That's cool.
Well, Gypsy and I have been trying to watch Star Trek.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm not exactly sure how many. Could be 8, could be 15, but
yeah,
it's not really years, unless by years you might mean less than 2.
Right. No, that is fair. Like I said, it's probably been 20 for me. I know that it's one of those that, especially because of the movie, I revisit this episode. I've probably revisited this episode a lot often. And to be absolutely fair, it's probably been closer to 10 years that since I've seen this episode. I own the DVD. It's like that first collection that they came out with of the Star Trek show. I picked up, this is the one DVD I picked up because of, its connection to the movie. So had to get it.
Something beautiful about the fact that, in the 60s, they make this TV show. And then the 80s, they come back with the same cast, essentially Kirk and Khan.
Yeah.
To tell their story many, many years later. I mean, they do the same thing with the Blade Runner. They come back. And there's a certain attraction to that all by itself. Obviously, the new trilogy in Star Wars has a certain amount of that same cachet in which we get to see the characters later on. But I think that it really improves the how cool it is that you could watch this TV episode and then you could watch the movie, and it's clear that time has passed because everyone's that much older, and
everyone looks different.
Yeah, and yet they're the same.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're not there yet, but like I said, flipping through TV channels late at night, I'll hit BBC America. They're doing it, and then so is Heroes and Icons is a new TV channel that's on, and they're showing Star Trek as well. And so you'll hit these like season 3 episodes, and you're like, well, that looks like William Shatner from the movie, or from the motion picture, or from TJ Hooker or whatever. You're like, okay, that's the Shatner I know. It's weird to see this like 1960s Kirk version of him as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, let's talk about some of the fun behind-the-scenes stuff. As always, we do in these original series episodes. The original draft of this was by a guy named Kerry Wilbur. To him, science fiction shows were interchangeable. He felt that they were very similar in some ways. He worked on a show called Captain Video that I had never heard of. And then also he worked in the opening episodes of Lost in Space. Both of which were the popular idea of people being transported in space while in suspended animation, while being frozen. So here's this idea he's already used 2 or 3 times, and he's like, well, let's do it again. But this time we'll use criminals, and it'll be different. So that's how the Botany Bay was created. But interesting note about the Botany Bay, by the way, contrary to popular belief, writes Mark Cushman, that there never was a penal colony called Botany Bay in Australia. Yeah, and then it was actually like Fort Jackson or something that was actually the first penal colony there in Australia. So there's an interesting piece of knowledge for you, little trivia you can toss around to all of your friends. So for his story, Wilbur chose the name Harold Erickson. Right, describing him as a Nordic Superman.
Right.
So we got like the Leif Erikson comparison there, and also Marla McGivers was a second communications officer. And in this first draft, we do get she falls for Erickson and helps him revive the rest of the convicts on the sleeper ship, so that they can commandeer the Enterprise. They do another draft. The show was just running too long. There was like 66 pages, which, in most TV shows, it's a minute a page. So that was long. Also, people behind the scenes felt that the dialogue and the actions that happened didn't sound like our heroes, And even back then, everyone started questioning, MacGyver's motivations. Like, would a woman really do this? And blah, blah, blah. Even in the show, we get this, which we'll talk about, but. Go ahead. I thought you were going to say more.
It's one of the central. There's 2 central problems in the story, right? One is MacGyver's helping Khan,
right?
And the second one is Kirk letting him read the technical manuals.
Yes.
And both of them are because this really needs to be a 3-episode arc.
Uh-huh.
They should, in episode 1, find Khan, think that he was just the leader of this early colonization effort, and they think he's cool and they're nice and they're kind of impressed by him and everyone likes him, and they let him wander around the ship, not necessarily give him technical manuals, but give him access to the ship, right? And he's able to figure things out. And he's got his eye on things, and we should have the sense as the audience by the end of that episode that there's a little bit more to him than meets the eye. And, maybe we're feeling he's a little too Lorca-ish or, what have you.
Yeah.
But not so much that we're like, oh my God, I can't believe they're giving this guy the technical manual. They don't even know who he is.
Yeah.
And then in episode 2, he would basically be turning the MacGyver's character, on many levels, right? Ideologically, appealing to, things where she feels like, like, let's say she's a communication officer. I can't move ahead because of her, and I'm thwarted here, and I really wish that it was a place my ambition could flower.
Yeah,
And then
here's some more motivation.
Right. You by the end of the second episode, you'd be like, oh my God, she's on his side.
Yeah.
And by this time we'd realize that by the end of that second episode, you realize, oh, he's a bad guy. He wants to take over the ship, which is kind of where we were by the end of the second act.
Yeah.
And then the third act would be the struggle to, control the Enterprise and so forth. And by then ideally, you'd feel like everyone's motivations made sense. And because this is condensed into an hour, even a 1960s hour, which is 52 minutes or whatever.
Yeah.
It feels like these two things have to happen because we just can't work all this plot into a single hour.
Yeah,
so we
exactly.
just have to accept that she's going to help him and that he's going to know an awful lot about how to steal the ship from Kirk.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, too, as I was reading through the book, that there are a couple of scenes that didn't even make it into the episode. And so we get, some stuff that, again, would have helped fill in a little more of these things. But,
they
just ran out of time. Exactly.
If they had done a longer arc, you could imagine, they're on the way from here to there, and they have an adventure, and Khan turns out to be helpful, and he helps the crew, and he proves to be useful, and everyone likes him. That would even make it harder, right?
Yeah.
But of course, there'd always be a certain amount of malevolence, a certain Lorca-nish to it, Lorca-nish to him, so that when he does turn, you're not like, oh, wait a minute, he was totally a good guy. What happened?
Yeah, right? We were on his side.
Yeah.
Felt bad for him in his time traveling. So it was actually Roddenberry who decided to turn them into supermen as opposed to common criminals. After the second draft that Wilbur did, he decided, wouldn't it make it for much more interesting, developments in the script if instead of them being just common criminals, suddenly they're these superior beings that are really going to make, trouble for Kirk and the gang. So as Cushman writes it, I like this quote here. As he had done so many times before in one memo, or in this instance, 2 paragraphs, Roddenberry completely reinvented the story from something that might have worked. But he's only gone on to make it better. So on the third draft now, then Kuhn decides he's going to, take a stab at it. So he does, and he writes the third script, but then he never shows it to anybody, and he sleeps on it. And then 2 nights later, he writes another copy of the script, and then he doesn't show anybody that one. And then 2 days later, writes a tighter, cheaper, sharper version of the script. So it's really really interesting, because then what happens is that Roddenberry then takes the script and in 24 hours, changes things. Like in this case, Erickson finally becomes Khan, and
right.
all of these things. So that's interesting. So, of course, they needed a director. So who do they bring on? But everyone's favorite, Mark Daniels. After his crowning success of the Menagerie, he returned for already his 6th episode. Robert Justman, the producer, said of Mark Daniels that during a drought, you pay for rain. And during the first year of Star Trek, you pray for Mark Daniels, because he's going to get it in on time and, under budget. So let's talk a little bit about Ricardo Montalban at this point. He was everyone's first choice to play Khan, and he was already a star. He was 45 years old already at this point, if you can believe that, and had top billing in film since 1947. On the stage in 1958, a show called Jamaica, he was nominated for a Tony Award as Best Actor in a Musical, which is interesting. I can't even imagine Montalban singing, but guess that was the thing. And of course, Roddenberry had already worked with him before as well. So that's also really exciting. So yeah, they brought him on and we're like, boom, let's do this. We're super excited. Again, the casting director says that Ricardo was one of those few people everyone knew in Hollywood, and because he was already a movie star and just beginning to do television, we scored with a high caliber actor higher than we expected. Then we got Madeline Rue here, who plays Marla McGivers. She was also a well-known TV guest star, had been in television since 1957, and would work with Montalban on 3 different occasions. First in 1960 in an episode of Bonanza, then obviously in this episode, and then in 1982, she too did an episode of Fantasy Island. How exciting. Also here we see John Winston turn in his second of 11 turns as Lieutenant Kyle when he's knocked out by Khan and held at gunpoint by MacGyvers. James Doohan and his Scotty continue to gain stature here. NBC was pleased with Doohan and his character as the producers were all looking in ways to involve Scotty more and more in this episode. And we see here that he even gets so special that he gets one of their super cool,
dress uniforms.
Dress uniforms. Thank you. Perfect answer. Great. Perfect. There we go. That's it. That's all my behind the scenes stuff there. Anything else you need to talk about?
Yeah, so I think, lurking back here is the eugenics movement of the early 20th century. So, eugenics comes out of, it's got philosophical origins and kind of scientific, stuff going back into the 19th century. And it just becomes more and more popular. And when you look at early 20th century people, it's like they're all eugenicists.
Yeah.
Right? And for a lot of them, it's connected to their racism, because in the early 20th century, you just, you find that more places than you'd like to find it.
Mm-hmm.
But everybody seems to be a eugenicist. Even if there's not a racial component, they still think that we need to improve the human race scientifically by selective breeding. And this might mean preventing the poor from having children, or, actually trying to match the best of the species together and move things along scientifically the way that we do with farm animals.
Yeah.
And it's really not until the Nazis give eugenics such a bad name that everyone, then nobody's a eugenicist, and nobody ever was a eugenicist, right? Except for the Nazis.
Right.
And so the whole thing is dropped as an idea that's so abhorrent. It's toxic, right? So when they're writing this, the idea of a return of eugenics, in a sense, is a kind of, what if the Nazis had won? Which is why when they start off with Erickson, they kind of have to make, it would have been too obvious.
Yeah.
Or too Nazi if they had stuck with a Nordic guy, right?
Yeah.
So in one sense, what they do is they go find the other Aryans, the real Aryans, right, who invaded India, 1000 BC and bring us kind of Indian culture.
Yeah.
So you also have this cast. Khan's group of people is just as diverse as the Enterprise is. It's global. They're from all over.
Yeah.
And so in this sense, it's another way of distinguishing them from the Nazis, right? This isn't a racially superior, eugenic group. These were people who were bioengineered to be superior. And in that sense, they probably took the best specimens from the globe and then improved them genetically, or, however they did it. And you get Khan's group of people, Khan's group of supermen. And presumably there were, because Khan was just one of the dictators, there were other groups at other places. Mm-hmm. So in one sense, it's kind of a disturbing mirror of the ship, in that they're this ethnically diverse, group of humans. But in this other sense, they're horribly tainted by the fact that they're eugenics. And not only does that have this kind of, 1940s, Nazi kind of connotation to it, especially to an audience watching this in the 60s, but there's this lurking hostility towards any kind of transhumanism in Star Trek. And so any kind of transhumanism that you can think of, genetic modification, cyborg augmentation, all of it, they're the monstrous enemies of the Federation. It's the Borg, it's Khan. We're all about human flourishing in Star Trek, not about human augmentation.
Right, exactly. Well, it's also funny in this episode too. Speaking of the diversity amongst the people in this episode, is that so you have Khan, Noonien Singh, right? This Indian warlord, this Sikh, and yet there is this Indian crewman who we have never seen before and gets no lines in this episode, and yet he's there a lot just to sort of like put the kibosh on like, oh, well, what are you trying to say? It's like, no, we got an Indian over here. He's good. Everything's fine. We don't have to worry about, see, he's good. We got one bad, one good. We're good. We're good. Even though, again, he doesn't say anything. So,
yeah.
All right. Well, on that blockbuster, let's get to it, folks.
Captain's log. Stardate.
It's 5-year mission.
So we open up and we're right in the middle of something. We find that they have already scanned and found that there's a ship out there. They don't know what kind of ship it is. That was a problem with one of the early drafts that Wilbur had written, is that they took the whole teaser to find the ship. It doesn't really put the crew in danger. So then, Justman was like, what are we doing? Can't we just skip this? Let's get to the part where they find it, which is ultimately what they did. Spock says, of course, that, well, no Earth ship could possibly have gotten this far. But then Uhura confirms it by, hearing the Morse code. To which, Kirk gives him a little gentle ribbing about it, like, oh, and I thought you said it couldn't possibly be an Earth ship. And Spock goes, I don't know why you find such happiness in finding that I'm wrong. Sorry, it's an emotional Earth weakness of mine, he says. So they find the ship. It's a DY-100, and this ship was built back in the 1990s, all the way back in the 90s. Funny how that Trek timeline has fallen so far. Spock postulates that doesn't mean that there are, humans on board. Aliens could have taken over the ship, he says. Kirk checks the weapons. Yeah, right, exactly, the backlids. Kirk checks the weapon status, making sure that we're good to go in case. Bones finds that there are heartbeats detected, but they are too slow and faint to be human. Spock finds there's machinery at work. Dun, dun, dun. And we go to credits on that nothingness. So boom, yeah, we're back. We find out the ship is called the Botany Bay. We find out a little bit about World War III. We find the first little bit. We got our first little bit of exposition really here. Well, that's true.
World War III is something else.
Yeah, I guess that's when the... Yeah, that's when the actual... But he says this is like the last of your world wars, the beginning of your last world wars or something. So, we got our first little bit of exposition here about the Eugenics War. And then we also find out that we have a historian on board. And she's going to beam over with the rest of the group. She knows a lot about the late 20th century, apparently. And her name is MacGyver. So hopefully she knows a lot about TV as well from the 20th century. So here we meet MacGyver's in her actual quarters. And there are statues and paintings of from Roman times, Roman centurions that she's painting. There's also a statue of Caesar sitting there. So this is one of... Go ahead.
They had a choice in how to depict their historian, right?
Right.
So they could have gone with social scientist, which would have made a lot more sense for the crew, right? In which case she'd probably also be, part-time archaeologist, exohistorian, someone who could probably handle some data, examine artifacts, as well as know the past. But instead, they went with a more humanistic historian, someone who's not just not scientific, but also in the sense that the arts and letters are, one big branch of the university. She's there in the arts. She's painting, reading. Yep. She's probably reading some poetry.
Yeah. There's some Shakespeare in there, some original Sophocles.
Right. So she's much more of the humanist type of humanities branch of history rather than the social scientist.
Yeah. Well, so this is one of the cutscenes I was telling you about before. There's a scene just before we go into her room here where crewman Martine, who we know from Balance of Terror and Shore Leave, right? She's the one who lost her husband. Martine tells McGivers that there's a crewman who's interested in asking her out. But MacGyver says that she is not interested in any man who doesn't have the spine to do the asking himself. So it kind of starts to lead you into a little bit of, why she later falls for Khan in the end, but still not great.
It's funny. Helps. So they talk about how, men of the 20th century were, bolder and what. And yet, the 60s men depicted in the Enterprise are in many ways more, mid-20th century madmen in that sense, right? Than guys even of the 90s, let alone the current era would be.
Yes, exactly. Speaking of Mad Men, I just watched, I couldn't sleep one night, so I was out here and I was flipping through and caught one episode, and I forgot how great that show is, right? The show's amazing. And then I realized it was they were heading into the last 4 episodes, so I just recorded them all and was like, I'm going to watch these last 4 episodes again because this show's so great. I need to go back and just do a complete rewatch of that sometime. So Scott and MacGyver are called to the transporter room. They end up beaming over, but not before we get this shot of somebody sort of dressed like a go-go girl in stasis. She has that weird 60s mesh thingy going on. So we find out that the use of the stasis fields to travel from one place to another was used all the way up until 2018. But by then that they were able to travel from star to star. So I guess they got 7 months left to figure that out here in the real world. Scotty turns on the lights, but this also starts to revitalize one of the kiosks, probably the leader, they surmise. But suddenly things start going wrong. The lights start flashing inside there. His heartbeat starts. It's funny, by the way, how much time script-wise, how much time McCoy spends watching his beats go up and then watching his beats go down. I'm like, oh my gosh, there's 30 seconds we could have cut right there. But anyway, so finally Kirk's
it says something about how fast they could do pacing.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, now that we're all basically post 24, you could cut basically all scenes, in half at least.
Yeah.
Because he would just look at the thing going, his heart's erratic. We need to act, quickly. It's, use modern hospital drama talk, and boom, he's up and he's around, and
we've got another great example of that coming right up here, by the way. So, Kirk's like, well, what happens if we just get him out of there? And Bones is like, well, he'll die in seconds if we don't. So meanwhile, they're debating this as opposed to just acting, right?
Right.
But then on top of it, we cut to each person gets a reaction shot, We go to MacGyver, Scotty, Bones, Kirk. And then they go. And then they decide, now we should pull him out of there. That's totally happened now. So funny. So then they get him out of there.
You know what they really needed there was a flashback scene.
Yes, one more scene of like them, even 30 seconds ago, like, oh, remember 30 seconds ago? We didn't get him out of there. So then the leader croaks out, how long has it been? And Kirk tells him, and then just before we go to commercial, we cut to MacGyver again, who says, how magnificent, just staring at him. Go to commercial. So we've had like this entire scene of like MacGyver becoming transfixed, with Khan. She's like staring at him. She's looking at him. We cut to all of these like reaction shots of her, which again, they sell part of it as of her intense curiosity, about the 20th century. There's, even Spock says they don't have a lot of information about the 90s, although later then they find plenty of it, but that's beside the point. But, I also equated this to like, a role-playing thing where he probably has a charisma of like 20, you know what I mean? It's like, it's off the charts. Every role, he makes every role in seduction. He makes every role in charm. And at this point, he's not even awake, and he's still, succeeding in all of those roles.
Right.
When it comes to her.
Which is why I think it would be so much better if they gave a full episode to Khan winning over not only the crew, but the audience.
Right.
So that instead of stating that he's got an amazing charisma, we would see he's got an amazing charisma.
Yeah,
we would feel it.
Yep.
And certainly an actor like, Montalban could have pulled that off in an hour.
Yeah.
That would have been, a little bit of writing, and boom, he just exudes the charm, and we're all like, wow, he's great. We like this guy.
Yeah, exactly. He's so charming. And, it's funny, too, because he never really, especially to the guys, he never comes across quite charming, does he? I mean, even in that first scene where he meets Kirk, he just, pretends to be fatigued and he goes back, it's just like, we don't see any of that. And then, like the next scene we see one scene with them, and he's just like pawing at her and like letting her hair down, that whole scene. And then the next time we see her, he's got her on her knees, like crushing her hand. You're just like, geez, why is this guy, winning her over at all?
Right. Yeah, you almost feel that there's something broken about her. That she exactly. That she wouldn't, like, warning bells wouldn't be going off. That this guy is no good.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, so back from the commercial, back at it. Bones is amazed at the physical prowess of the leader. A lesser man would have died already, probably. We hear about their ship. Kirk and Spock are talking about it. Nuclear propulsion, again, similar to what we heard in earlier episodes about the Enterprise itself. Kirk and Bones try to discover anything they can about Botany Bay. Kirk remembers in the past that Botany Bay was a penal colony in Australia, which we've already talked about, isn't true. But I also put this, like, that's just weird information to have at your fingertips. Like, why does, like, Kirk have that, in his memory banks? Only because he needs it, I guess, at this point. Convenient, almost, I wrote. Kirk is concerned that perhaps these folks are a danger to the ship, but Spock feels that this is an illogical leap. However, he doesn't have enough facts to make any kind of theory, which means, as Spock says, insufficient facts always lead to danger. Well, okay, thanks for coming around on that one, Spock. Appreciate it. In sickbay, Kirk now realizes that this leader is probably one of the Eugenics once Bones tells him about how, quickly he recovered. Meanwhile, MacGyver walks in as smitten as ever. Kirk pulls her aside to rate her performance on that away team. The fate of the entire crew could rest on the acting of one crew member. She assures him that her interest is only professional curiosity. Though Kirk reminds her that men were more bold in the 90s. Bones basically says, well, that was well handled. You could have made a fair psychologist. To which Kirk replies, a fair psychologist? Then the leader wakes up and he does some kind of yoga or something. I don't know what he's doing there. And then he picks up a scalpel and then pretends to be asleep when Bones walks in. He then pulls the knife on McCoy, who responds with, well, either choke me or cut my throat. Make up your mind. I like a brave man, says the leader. Bones calls Kirk down, saying that he is awakened.
But leaving out the homicidal part.
Yeah. Oh, don't worry. We don't need any guards in here to keep an eye on him. It's he's apparently fine. I've won him over with my charm, Bones says.
And my knowledge of anatomy.
Yes. So Kirk asks him his name, but the man insists on answers first. Where are we headed? He asks. Starbase 12. Is that going to help you? Asks Kirk. Does that mean anything to you? The leader asks to be asked for his people to revive, but Kirk tells him not until we reach Starbase 12. And then he finally reveals his name. It's Khan. As Kirk starts to ask more questions, Khan decides he is too fatigued to continue. And he does a waving gesture here that we get to see again in the movie, which I was really excited about. I'm like, oh, we pulled that out again. Nice. Kirk tries to continue, but Bones then agrees that later might be better. But apparently now, Khan has plenty of time to read all the specs on the ship. So we were talking about that a little earlier, and I was thinking to myself, shouldn't this be like classified information? Like, isn't there a next generation thing where like somebody takes over Riker's body and he tries to get information out of the computer, but he can't because he doesn't know the passcode? I mean, like, that should be like totally restricted information, don't you think?
Yeah, which is why it would be better. I mean, they had to do it because they had to tell the audience he's going to be able to do things like block off the turbo lifts and shut down the intruder alert system and do this kind of stuff. But it would just feel much better as the audience if the way he figured this stuff out is that things would happen and he would see the crew's response and he would learn something about the ship.
Because even in this next scene, we've got Spock like keeping an eye on what he's looking at. You know what I mean?
Right.
Nobody's suspicious at all. He's like, well, he's really devouring those technical manuals. I'm like, shouldn't we stop him or something? Should we be giving him all this information? Whatever.
Boy, he seems really interested in how to set the warp core into a bomb mode. You know? Yeah,
exactly. And wow, he really is interested in all those intruder protocols, which he later knows how to like stop.
He hasn't read anything on the replicators or how to synthesize food or
anything important that he might actually need.
Yeah.
It's also funny here because I've thought about this before and yet to mention it, you know, in the 23 episodes it's been since we've been watching, is that, you know, you got Nimoy is always looking into that little like viewfinder there.
Right.
And they got that blue light constantly shining up into his eyes. Like, that's got to be bad. It's got to be some sort of damaging. It can't be good for him just to be constantly staring into that blue light all the time.
Well, you know, that's what they say about the kids these days.
Right? Yeah, exactly. Looking right into those phones. So here, Kirk and Spock now decide that, hey, they could be part of that superior race. We found out even more now about the Eugenics War. 40 of them seized power in 40 different cities at the same time. But then infighting broke out between them all. As Spock tells us, superior ability breeds superior ambition. And then we find that 80 to 90 of these supermen were unaccounted for. Kirk says, how is this possible? And Spock says, would you like to tell a bunch of Don Trout and Purple that there are still 80 or 90 supermen unaccounted for? So MacGyver makes her way back down to talk to Khan. And he instantly is trying to seduce her again, calling her pretty, telling her to take her hair down, then like physically taking her hair down and then like pawing her neck and touching it. She attempts to leave, but then he grabs her roughly by the arm and then says, I'm glad you came. Like, okay, cool. That's how you're gonna follow up a grab to the arm. I'm glad you came. We then go to the formal dining room with everyone in their formal dress uniforms, including Scotty, like I said. Interesting to look at all the badges, too, that everybody's wearing. Kirk has like 10 of those little triangles on him. Bones has 4. Spock has like 7 or something. He then also asks Bones about MacGyver's feelings towards Khan. Bones says that he does have quite a magnetism, and that could override hers, especially with her preoccupation with men from the past. Cut to her quarters, where Khan has entered, hoping to be escorted to dinner. He even mentions to her how she changed her hair for him. He starts petting her again, and then looks around the room, and then sees the Leif Erikson, sees Genghis Khan, sees Caesar, and then finds a picture of himself dressed as a sheik, or as a Sikh, or a sheik, either one. Be cautioned, though, he says to her. Such men take what they want, and then kisses her. And then we get a weird. This is a totally technical thing, and I'd just like to mention it. Is that this is one of the few times where we fade to black without going to a commercial. And it's interesting because the fade black can be used for different things. It feels sometimes it's used as an ending. Sometimes, which I think like here, it's used just to say, and then time passes. Because next thing, or hit me.
There are things happening we don't show on television.
All right, fair, especially in the 60s. But we do find ourselves later now in the middle of the dinner. He's wearing a shirt. I'm dumb sometimes, but his shirt, the yellow one that he's wearing, looks like a pair of Umbro shorts, that were popular in the 90s. Thought that. I was like, so, they did get that part correct at least. Knew what people were wearing in the 90s.
Yeah.
But we are in the middle of dinner. Spock begins to poke and prod about the era in which Khan is from. Khan insists that one man could have ruled like Caesar over the Roman Empire. Spock keeps poking and prodding, but Khan cuts it short, calling Kirk an excellent tactician. You let your number 2 attack while you search for weaknesses. But Kirk assures him, no, this is just a social occasion. To which Khan responds, it has been said that social occasions are warfare concealed. Dun, dun, dun.
So he is so belligerent so often.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
He pulls a knife on his doctor. He basically is saying, we're in combat. We are opponents. We must fight, during this dinner. And everyone's alarm bell should be going off, right?
Yeah.
That, this is a guy we got to constrain. This is a guy who's belligerent, who's hostile. And everyone's just kind of like, well, it was the 90s. Things were different then.
They were bolder.
Yeah. They took what they wanted.
Exactly.
It's okay. We can't judge.
Exactly. So Khan responds to Kirk's message by saying, it has been said that social occasions are warfare concealed. Oh, I said that already. But Kirk continues and he says, but you fled when the world needed courage the most. And then Khan slams his hand down. We offered the world order. We, says Kirk. Oh, very nice, says Khan. I like this bit. There's such good writing here in the dialogue. We see the two trying to, outthink each other. Kirk pulling all of his moves. Khan almost outthinking him all the time, seeing what's really going on until he is actually then caught, having trouble seeing through his ruse. Kirk's ruse.
So, again, in the longer version that I imagine, right?
Yes, exactly. In the better version.
Right. Khan could have learned, instead of just reading the technical manuals about how to put a wrench in the turbolift, he also would have learned how to talk like a 23rd century person, right? So he could express the values, and what would happen is that you'd have these longer conversations in which Kirk could throw him off his game and in a sense, look behind the curtain and get him to say stuff like this. But instead of a conversation in which it's like, I am your enemy. I'm going to defeat you. I'm going to crush you. I'm going to take what I want. Instead, it's like, oh, I believe in peace and diversity and nice things, but I take what I want. No. What I mean to say is that, I really admire the progress, the social progress, and all the ways that we have advanced so much. I really admire it. But we gave the world order. I mean to say, those kinds of where you'd see these slips, and they would make the crew go, wait a minute. There's some inconsistencies here. And is it possible this guy's one of the eugenicists? Because, of course, he'd have some story about how they were colonists escaping the eugenics wars.
Yeah.
Oh, it was terrible. It was bad. It was awful. We had to get away from that place. But we gave the world order.
Exactly.
So here, Khan decides he asks to be excused again and grows fatigued again and walks out. Back in his quarters, he's a little bit miffed. You could tell that he's like mad that he like fell for something. In his quarters, MacGyver shows up and she apologizes. He then goes to kiss her and she pulls away. And so he like throws her away and says, "Stay or go, but do it because it is what you wish to do." It's funny too because his like serious Corinthian accent comes out here. You know, it's hardly Indian like he's supposed to be, but it's fine. Then and then he's like, "Now you must ask me to stay," which she does. And then he takes her hand and it's like really soft for a moment. And then he starts to crush it and she ends up on her knees. And then he asks her to open her heart for him. And then, you know, it's like, okay, we know he's supposed to be a villain, but come on here, people. Super manipulating. And I wrote, and people thought Kylo and Rey's relationship was messed up. This goes far beyond that. And then he pretty much says, "I need your help in taking over the ship." And
which you would have to think that any Starfleet officer would be like, whoa.
Yeah, when did this? She at least does say, "You're not going to hurt anybody, are you?" Yeah. And then he's like, "You doubt me." And then, but then she's like, "Okay, I'll help you." Dun, dun, dun. We go to commercial. You know, it's funny, actually, that I think about it, because if we think, especially in Next Generation, how Roddenberry never wanted like there to be friction amongst the, you know, the crew, to actually have somebody in Starfleet who would be so crazy as to, you know, go through with this. It's really interesting that he even let it happen, even though I guess he wrote a draft of it.
Well, and I think part of it is he hadn't yet formulated it's in hindsight. You know, you watch the episode in 1973 and you're like, the Starfleet person have done that? That makes no sense, and you evolve your theory of like how people are in the 23rd century.
Well, and too, you know, it sort of fits in with the whole Discovery thing, right? Of like, we're only kind of finding our way into what it means to be a part of the Federation. You know what I mean? And so, yes, probably by the 24th century, people aren't, you know, just giving up their, giving up the ships because some hot person comes aboard. So that's probably, you know, we can at least say that's part of it as well. Back from commercial, we find that they have found data on Khan. We find out his full name, Khan Noonien Singh. And from 92 to 96, he was absolute ruler of 1/3 of the entire Earth. The guys start talking about like, oh, you know, that's pretty impressive that he was able to do all of that stuff. And Spock is like dismayed by it. He's like, I don't understand how you can, you know, even think about like what a good thing this is. To which, you know, Kirk replies, "Well, we all have a barbarous streak in us, Mr. Spock. We can both appreciate and hate the man." Then we get another great interrogation scene here between...
So that scene in which they're admiring Khan, right?
Yeah.
In one sense, it gets across what's going on, right? In another sense, it feels awkward that like if it's barbarous, if that's what's going on, if that's who Khan is, they should have been much more alerted to it, right?
Right.
I feel like Khan should be much more seductive than barbarous.
Yeah.
If everyone's not going to be like, "Oh, you're awful, we need to lock you up," not invite you to dinner.
Yes.
In that sense, he needs to be more vampire than, you know, what's the...
Werewolf?
Yeah, right, exactly. There you go. And so instead of being aggressive and hostile, he should be seductive and using people's, you know, stuff against them, like their ambition, their desire to move up, their desire to, you know, see their idealism in a sense, right?
Right.
And we just don't have a sense of that because in an hour there's only so much you can do, and
right.
Instead, they take these shortcuts So here we have the scene where the men get to admire Khan in the same way that we've kind of been establishing that MacGyver admires Khan.
Yeah.
But, again, if we'd stretched this out and, that they talked a lot, and was it the last or the second to the last after Trek, about how much side-eye there was in Discovery, right?
Yes, yeah.
And that's what you needed in this episode, in which over the course of 2 or 3 episodes, people could say admiring things about Khan, and Spock could give him the side-eye, like, what the hell's going on here?
Yeah.
Starfleet regulations prohibit this kind of behavior. And because it was successful, and because he maybe saved Crewman Jones, you're approving of it.
Yeah.
And then the cast would then be on the defensive, would then have to say, well, no, I mean, what he did was wrong. But, guys back in the day were, they were bolder, and they were, you'd make that argument, right?
Yeah.
And we got to tell him it's wrong. And then you tell him, and he's like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize, whatever. But he's got that Lorca-ness to him, right? That willingness.
Yeah.
That's what we saw in Lorca, this willingness to break the rules and go just, a step beyond what was acceptable. And in the same way, he'd be on the borderline of acceptability, crossing over sometimes. And then when you call him on, he's like, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be bad.
Mm-hmm.
And he'd suck you in. But then, of course, when it's times for him to really be bad, you're like, oh, my God, look at that. There it is. As opposed to,
we knew it was coming.
As opposed to, like, if you found out that it was Tilly who was actually the bad one. So
okay.
Let's point out at this point that there is no Sulu. Sulu's not in this episode. We had a different.
He was
guy
written in this episode, but he was not there.
We had a different guy, in his station the whole episode, and Chekhov isn't even on the series yet.
Yes.
But presumably, Khan recognizes him, and he recognizes Khan. So in theory, he must be in the lower decks, or
he hasn't made it to the bridge yet.
He hasn't made it to the bridge, but he's there. So we've got these 2 key characters from the series as a whole, but also from Star Trek 2, who just aren't in the episode.
That's true. That's a good point. So we get this. Luckily, as you said, they have at this point now put a guard on his door and locked his door so he can't get out.
Mm-hmm.
We get another great scene here with Khan and Kirk. Khan says, how little man himself has changed over the years. It appears that we will do well in your century. Well, Kirk doesn't like that, so he leaves. We then see Khan do this like crazy warm-up, to generate his great strength. And this is also a move I've seen Dad jokingly use on more than one occasion. Dad, it doesn't work. I don't know what you're doing. So, okay. But he does manage to slide the electric door open and knock out the guard. And when he punches the guard, that guard goes flying. He does like a flip, out of the way. Must have been quite the wallop. The MacGyver uses the phaser to take over the transporter room from Kyle and beams Khan aboard his own ship. It's not only amazing to me that MacGyver can somehow know how to use the transporter, but that she does it in such a way that it's also undetected by the bridge, because apparently they don't know that anybody's used that too. So, wow, she's really a jack of all trades. I mean, she's a historian, not a transporter chief. So obviously, although she may have had some past experience with the transporter, to be able to mask it from the bridge does seem a little questionable is all. Talk about a Mary Sue. He then wakes all the others aboard the Botany Bay. Now, there was actually more stuff shot on the Botany Bay. But again, it was cut. But this time it was cut because the censors didn't appreciate the outfits that the people on the other side were wearing. So they made them cut as much of it as they possibly could. So that's funny.
That is funny.
Yeah.
Because in the future, we'll all be nudists, right?
Yeah, exactly. Apparently. Or in those weird meshy go-go things.
I think that's what Roddenberry was thinking.
Now we know. That makes more sense.
Clothing will be optional in our glorious utopian future.
So Khan wakes everybody up, and then we cut to the bridge. And then suddenly on the bridge, everything starts to fall apart. Everything's inoperable. Nothing is running. Khan is running everything from engineering. Uh-oh. Kirk refuses to give up the bridge. To which Khan says, it's a moot point. Everybody on the bridge will eventually suffocate anyway. Dun, dun, dun. Commercial. Back at it. Captain's log. They have my ship. It's pretty much exactly how he said it too. I loved it. They have my ship, and then he's about to pass out, and he's the last one of all the characters on the bridge. He's the last one to pass out. They are now somewhere in the ship where there's a view screen. I think it's the trial thing from the menagerie, but it's hard to say. Uhura's there, and Scotty, and Spock, and Bones, and they're all being asked by Khan to join him. Oh, and the unnamed Indian crew member is also there as well. Khan is asking him to join him, but they all refuse. Scott then asks, what happened to the captain? So then Khan forces her to use the view screen, but she sits at the view screen and refuses to do it, and then is smacked by one of the guards. And then is almost smacked. This guy. What's that?
Stares at this guy with such intensity.
I know, right? Yeah, she does. And then is almost smacked again until MacGyver steps in to stop it. She's gaining a conscience. What's happening here? On the view screen, then we see Kirk locked in some kind of pressure chamber because this exists in the medical bay. He's about to be suffocated. He asks Spots. Yes. He asks Spock, are you going to join me? Or are you going to let your captain suffocate? And Spock here rightly refuses, because let's be honest, people, like, you can't just give up your ship to save your captain. The captain's willing to go down with the ship.
Outweigh the needs of the few. The many outweigh the needs of the few.
Or the one. MacGyver then asks to leave, saying that she can't watch what's going to happen. Khan continues to implore them to join him. They still refuse. And then the picture cuts out. MacGyver shoots the guard. We see MacGyver now. She shoots the guard with a hypo and releases Kirk. But even still, at this point, she begs him not to kill Khan. Whose side is this lady on? We then see Spock and the guard arrive, and Kirk hides in the corner. He then tries to fight the Eugenic, but it's good to know that even now, Spock's hand pinch can even take out a product of Eugenics.
That's right.
Lucky thing. Spock then gives him the lowdown. They decide to gas the ship. Inside the courtroom, we see the gas start to take over. But Khan runs away. Scotty tries to run after him after punching a guy out. Good to know he can punch out somebody who has a product of the Eugenics as well. Gas is now seeping into the whole ship, except for engineering, where somebody has shut down the line. Kirk runs to meet Kirk runs to meet Khan there. So then we cut to engineering. Khan is sitting at the bay trying to figure out how to overload the ship's thing. And all of a sudden, Spock and Scott are having this announcement over the communication grid in engineering, and they tell him that Kirk is coming to engineering. That doesn't seem logical to me at all. Kirk runs in, but Khan is ready there and steals his phaser. He then crumbles it in front of him. Khan then tells us the engines are now set to overload. Kirk sillily tries to stop the controls, but Khan pulls him off. And then there's a weird lot of not Kirk in this stunt Kirk. Not Kirk is seen a lot in this episode. Again, we don't have the grainy television that they had back in the day. Maybe that would help cover it, but...
And the other thing we have to consider is the size of the screen.
Oh, that's also true. That's true. You know, they had, like 12-inch TVs back then?
Yeah, so, I mean, to go back to Mad Men, right? You think about that little tiny Mad Men screen.
Right, exactly.
Watching that show, and you're like, I just see two guys fighting. I barely know who they are.
Yeah, exactly. And it's black and white, so I don't know who's yellow and who's... Well, they're both in yellow at this point anyway. Oh, no, he's in red at this point because he's in, like, prison gear or whatever. He's not in his yellow shirt, but yeah. So it's the red versus the yellow. Dun, dun, dun. So then, Khan pulls Kirk off of the thing and sends it flying. And then not Kirk does the tumble. And he gets back up, but it's still not Kirk as he goes to attack Khan again. They scuffle. We see not Kirk, then not Kirk stands again and punches Khan. Then in the close-up, we see Kirk continue to wail on him. Then Khan throws not Kirk up against the controls. Khan raves about his strength and how strong he is. I have 5 times the strength you do, he says. Meanwhile, Kirk turns the control switch and pulls it out, and it's this weird, like, long, hard bar that he uses then to beat Khan down. It's all over. Oh, but the music tells us it's not over yet, because the beeping tells us that the ship could blow at any minute. But luckily, Kirk rushes over and saves the day. Yay! Captain Kirk. The trial is held. Khan and McGevers sit. Kirk decides not to put them into reorientation, but instead sends them to City Alpha 5. Can you tame a world? Kirk asks Khan. Khan says, have you read Milton? Kirk smiles and says, I get it. I know that reference. I got it. McGivers is then faced with the decision. Does she take the court-martial or does she accompany Khan and his crew? You know it will be a struggle, says Khan. But she agrees to follow Khan, and off they go. Mr. Scott says, I feel bad as a Scotsman. I should know Milton, but I'm not all caught up on it. What did he mean? And Kirk says, well, Satan at one point says it is better to reign in hell than to serve in heaven. Credits. Oh, I forgot. Spock then says, I wonder what it would be like to go there in 100 years and see what city they have made.
Or
to which, yeah, exactly. To which Kirk replies, yes, sir, it would. It sure would. It's almost as if they're setting up the sequel there.
That's right.
Bum, bum, bum. Credits. Yay. Interesting thing in the credits, by the way. Don't know if you noticed this, but her credit is given as Marla. It's not even given as Marla McGivers. It just says Marla. But her name as Marla is never used in the whole show. So that's interesting. Well, let's talk a little bit about the budget here. Because Star Trek once again spent more than its near impossible episode allowance of $185,000. Space Seed, despite being primarily a bottle show, actually cost them $197,000. Most of its overrun due to the cost of building and photographing the Botany Bay miniature, and the design and the construction of the interior as well. The running deficit on the show is now up to $77,000.
What about all those forbidden costumes?
Yeah, exactly. They could have saved money there. They weren't able to be on screen anyway.
But that's what the future looks like.
Yeah, they keep telling us it's all these weird uniforms. Ricardo Montalban has said, I thought that the character of Khan was wonderful. He was overly ambitious man that had dimensions. Sometimes when you read a villain, he's just a villain through and through. But this man had facets. He was a genetically engineered man with mental and physical superiority. And it's only natural that he would use that superiority and wants to conquer. On the other hand, he falls in love. He takes his girl as his wife when they go into exile. It was a love that was very real, and it humanized the character for me. All right, Ricardo, I don't know what you're talking about there, but
so he has the advantage of being able to read the script and imagine stuff, right?
Yeah, that's true.
We've got 52 minutes from which to extract.
Yeah.
So obviously, Montalban, being a good actor, was able to give himself the motivation he needed to deliver the lines and to have the facial expressions to give, it's a really good performance.
Yeah.
It's just that he's got a lot more going on than we're able to see. And what they needed was 3 or 4 or 5 episodes.
Right.
They need 3, right? They need 3 episodes. One in which we all learn to like Khan. One in which Khan begins to do his seduction and turn people over to his side. And then the third one with the fight.
Yep.
And then any other ones would have been gravy. It's just, in the world we live in today, right, if they had made that like Discovery, in which, Mudd was a recurring character, much more dynamic and well-built, and in which things played out over time. I just think that an episode like this, so what my favorite episode, Balance of Terror. Mm-hmm. it fits nicely into that 52 minutes.
Yeah.
You know, you're not wishing that was a 3-episode arc, because it does nicely with what they've got. But this, because characters need an arc in this episode, right? Some characters need to go from one place to another by the end, and it just happens too quickly.
Well, I think that too, we find that there are a lot of episodes, you know, in this original series where we're like, if they just would have had more time to flesh out this, or to really like make us understand why this character's doing, or this villain is doing this, you know?
Right.
I think we're going to see a lot more. We're going to see a lot of, you know, villains who are a lot more one-dimensional coming up here.
Mm-hmm. And of course, what we get in Discovery, which I think really would have benefited, you know, this episode in particular, but the original series in general, is you have multiple storylines happening at the same time, and stories have the time, you know, to actually, you don't have to compress everything into an hour.
Right.
You know, so it feels like if they had done Ash, you know, that whole storyline, it would have happened in an hour. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, unfortunately, yeah.
You meet the guy, he seems like a nice guy. Whoa, he turns out to be a Klingon. I mean, in a sense, that's the story of The Trouble with Tribbles.
Right.
And, you know, the way they did it, because he shows up, what, like episode 5 or 6 or something?
Yeah, Mud.
No, Ash.
Oh, yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, we basically find out almost towards the end. So, like, it's a 10-episode thing.
Yeah. Yep, exactly.
And so, you know, Khan could have been running around as a, you know, guy left over from the 20th century, and only basically at the end of episode 2 are they figuring out, wait a minute, I don't think this is, you know, Harmony Smith, you know, nice colony man. I think it's NOONIEN SINGH.
Dun, dun, dun. Well, that wraps my notes for this episode. How about you? You got anything else you want to discuss that we haven't gotten to yet?
No, I think we covered it pretty nicely.
So too, because, you know, a few more years, we're going to actually get to Star Trek 2, and I'll be able to talk all sorts of stuff about that for sure. All right. Well, folks, thanks for joining us as always. Next week is A Taste of Armageddon, which, again, is one of those episodes I don't think I've ever seen, but we'll see. Maybe I have. I could be totally confused. But just looking at the episode description, I was like, I don't know if I know which episode this is. So, hey, another fun episode where I'll be like, I don't know what happens, and how exciting that will be. So, hey, I'm saying goodbye from Austin. Ken from Houston. Why don't you say goodbye, Ken?
Live long and prosper.
There we go. Perfect. And we will see everybody next week.